Welcome to the Strategic Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Macias, and today we have a special guest. His name is Dan LeFave. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brendan. Good to be here.
I want everybody to get a brief understanding as to how you came to this point in your journey. Give us a little summary.
Sure. Well, I should probably go right back to when I was young, because obviously I decided to have my own business. But my parents, especially my dad, he was a butcher. So we had a meat shop. And we didn't just have one meat shop, we had two meat shops at one point. And I was operating one, so to speak. I was the family representative, but I was only 13 years old. So I really wasn't, old enough to speak for the company, let's say, But anyway, so that's where, maybe that bug started, having your own freedom, your own business and so on, but also a ton of responsibility because we're in the retail business, man. We were working 6 days a week, and sometimes Sundays were for making sausage day, so you work 6 days plus the extra day, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to take over the business. Neither did my brother. So I ended up going to school. I studied geography, and I realized the only thing I would actually use, or that I thought I could use, was from geography, was to teach. And I didn't want to teach school. I didn't want to be a school teacher. So anyway, from there, I sort of meandered a little bit. I worked for an investment firm. I worked for the biggest, broker in the firm. And I don't know how I got that, but I got it. And then after that, my brother had started a business in construction for wireless telecom. And we were discussing things, and he asked me if I wanted to join him. I did. I started working in the field. Within the first few weeks, I sprained my thumb, extreme sprain. So I ended up in the office, and I stayed there. I ended up organizing the business, the finances, everything. I was projecting. I was doing all sorts of things. Unfortunately, he was trying to build a business and didn't want to share equity or share ownership. So I started looking around. A friend of mine introduced me to a company called ClearNet. They were bought by TELUS. And I went there. They recruited me for a $25 million project. And that was a huge leap. Biggest projects we had were around 100 grand or something like that. Then again, I sort of did the same thing. I was just, finding my way. So I was at that company for a little while. TELUS bought them out. After a 2-year contract, they said, we're not continuing this. We're going to stop and reset. And I said, fine, I'm gone. Contract's over. I started looking for other opportunities. Then I got recruited by Bell Mobility. They recruited me to do real estate negotiations. I didn't know how to do that. I figured that out. And then I went from there. Same sort of similar thing happened. They had problems renewing my contract because the parent company, Bell, was making big deals about that. And I went over to another company called Toronto Community Housing, and I managed 3 aspects of their commercial real estate portfolio. And I was doing so well that the CFO called me into his office one day and said, I want you to manage the whole portfolio. And I said, all right. And then I took it from about 10 million to 25 million in, about 5 years. And after all that, I realized, interesting and fun, but I was getting bored. And I didn't really see my next step. I didn't want to be an executive, that's for sure. I didn't want to be in that role, too bureaucratic. But I started doing some soul searching, and I ended up finding somebody that was in Salt Lake City. I was flying down there for another business that I had started, and he invited me to stay at his house. And he's the CEO of Augmendino Corporation. Augmendino is known for the books, The World's Greatest Salesman, The 10 Scrolls, and many other popular books. So anyway, I stayed at Dave's house. And at the end of the evening, I said, you're running a business here. Show me where you operate. I want to see it. And so he showed me. And then after discussing things for a little bit, he said, Dan, I think you'd make a great coach. And that was the seed. That was the start. I flew back home. Dave and I didn't end up reconnecting, but a friend of mine connected me with Bob Proctor and his work. And at that time, I was just trying to figure things out. So I bought all of his programs. I spent whatever money I needed. I bought all of his programs, started studying it. Next thing you know, that same person says to me, why don't you talk to Bob's team about, coaching? I said, all right. So I do that. I get on the call with his sales guy, and he turns around and says, let's get Bob on the phone. I'm like, okay, I don't know who Bob Proctor is, but sure, whatever. So that evening, I get on the call. I'm talking to Bob Proctor and his sales guy. Bob pitches me on becoming a coach, learning his system, learning from him, being mentored by him. And I said yes. And so I invested more. And this is all, I had no income. My wife's home with the kids. It just, but I did it. I did, yeah. And I did.
Chasing the dream. Yeah.
Right. And so I just said yes. And I learned everything I could from him. And then I started building my own programs and courses and so on. And now I have my own systems, my own app, and I coach people from different parts of the world.
Quite the journey. And I mean, you you ended up in these positions that you initially weren't ever prepared for, but you went in and you did really great at every single one, and it led you to this, right?
Well, I think I did. I think I did great at every one. But yeah, just learning, project management. I'm not a project manager, but I just learned how to project manage, and I learned how to handle things. Real estate negotiations, didn't know anything about that. I'm sitting at a table in a condo with the board, and these are former, bankers and lawyers, and they're way more intelligent than I am. But here I am negotiating with them, and I'm winning negotiations. The commercial portfolio, same thing. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I was just like, okay, this thing is a whole mess. We ended up installing a real estate database, and the whole team was redone. Everybody was pushed out, and I had to rebuild the team from the ground up. So yeah, I'm very resourceful, and you put me in a corner and I'll figure a way out. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. So I mean, I guess that leads to what you're doing now, right? You get backed up into a corner, you figure it out, and I guess maybe this leads to you seeing things within yourself, some self-reflection. Let's talk about what you're doing now with the coaching. Okay, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they assume, growth stalls because they need better systems or better people or better executions, but you take a different view. So let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. I'll reference the human genome. Like, we know all of the humans' genes now. So now we just need to figure out which ones we need to tap into to get what we want. If we don't want to have gray hair anymore, well, then let's figure out which gene is causing gray hair and then solve for that. So I don't deal with human genome. I deal with neuroscience. So it's like, what do we need to do to get the results we want? If you look at success, it's nothing but a series of better decisions. That's all it is. Warren Buffett says, I made 12 great decisions. I'm sure if we sat with him, we would hear there were thousands and thousands of decisions that he made that led to the 12 that he's mentioning. So they're compounding, right? So you can always connect the dots looking backwards. So if that's true, if you can connect the dots looking backwards, and it's all about making better decisions, well, then you better get your mind clear and focused and dialed into what you want, because there's a ton of noise. We don't need to talk about that. We know there's endless noise, right? Things are happening all the time, right? And you're just like plugged into so much information. It's just, so how do you decipher what's noise and what's signal? That's the challenge. So when I'm working with entrepreneurs, these people were operators. They were owner operators, just like everybody is at the beginning. But how do they develop that new identity? How do they establish that new perception, those new perspectives, right? It doesn't just happen. So the approach that I take is this. And you study the greatest people, right? So if you study what Leonardo did, 7,000 pages of notes. If you study what Bill Gates does, think weeks. If you study what Richard Branson does, takes notes. The whole Virgin Empire is based on his note taking, right?
Yeah.
So how do you sum that up? They're thinking about what they're thinking. Most people aren't thinking about what they're thinking. So that's called ignorance, right?
Yeah.
They have no idea what they're thinking. And then if you even go further back and look at psychology, Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Okay, so we have this part of our mind that's running everything, right? It's our system. It's system one, right? It's keeping your heart beating, your blood flowing, your lungs expanding and contracting. It's doing all that. But it's also storing all your memories. 96, 98% of your habits, behaviors, and actions come out of that hard drive, that subconscious mind. But you're not using it. We're not using it right now, actually. We're using our conscious mind, right? So the trick is to make the unconscious conscious. Well, guess what? Neuroscience has figured it out. They call it metacognitive mapping. What is that? You take the thoughts and you put them where you can see them, put them on paper, put them on a screen, put them in a mind map, put them in front of you, right? Then you can't deny it. You can't say, I didn't say that. It's right there. I documented as you were saying it, right? So that's my unique process. I use metacognitive mapping to figure out where the breakdowns are and where the blind spots are. We bring them to the surface, and then we figure out pathways out. And then little micro steps and micro actions are taken. And those build up. And guess what that does? The habits and behaviors become a new identity. And then once they have that new identity, then they can go for, like one of my clients went from bidding on $5 million projects to bidding on a $20 million project and winning it, right?
So I want to know where you start with somebody. I mean, I guess there will be different levels. And, my understanding is that you're going to hit a ceiling. There's going to be a bottleneck. And in order to get to that next level, like that CEO that you're talking about, from $5 million to $20 million jobs and winning those, you have to change yourself or the way you're operating things within a business. Now, this is looking within yourself. Now, where would you typically start with analyzing somebody and how they are, their thought processes?
Well, there's a lot to it, but let's just focus on, what's really the leverage points. So everybody has their own perceptions, right? Like that's one of our mental faculties. We have perceptions. So we all have our own lens. We're looking at the world through our own lens. So that's something that I have to figure out. I have to find out what their lens is. It's easy to find out what their identity is. Hey, do you have children? Yeah. Okay. You're a father. That's an identity, right? Are you a business owner? Yeah. Great. Okay. You're an entrepreneur. Okay. Fantastic. So then we start documenting what their identities are, like what they associate with, right? But then they say, this is what I want over here. I want a $20 million company. Of course, I started asking the question, why? What are you going to do with a $20 million company? What are you going to do with a $20 million company that a $5 million company couldn't do, right? We started figuring out, I have to dial into what they want and why. And then we figure out, sometimes people say they want something and then we start mapping it backwards and it has to do with their income and their freedom. And they realize, oh, I don't need a big company like that. I just need a little bit of a bigger one than what I have right now. I thought that I needed, that bigger company and more money, but I don't. So the key here is to find out where they're at, where they want to go, and then that's a gap we need to bridge, right?
I mean, in some sense, I kind of have the feeling that you become a therapist at the same time, helping them figure out exactly where they actually need to get to feel some self-accomplishment or self-fulfilling or something of the sort. Does that sometimes get to be the case?
Yes. I don't really like being the therapist though, that much. However, the approach that I take is this. So if you think about AI, and we know how AI works, the better you prompt it, the better results you get. And sometimes you spend hours prompting it just to get the right thing, right? So your mind is no different. Your subconscious mind is just like AI. But it's way better than AI. It can store so much more, right? It's 40,000 bits per second. Like it's just a freaking machine. You don't prompt it well enough. So guess what I do? I do the research and I figure out how to prompt my clients well. So if I ask them a question and they can't answer it instantaneously and they kind of look away, now I know we've tapped into their higher mind, that subconscious, right? And which is where we need to go. We need to go to the hard drive, right? So that's one of the ways that I do it. But I also am collecting data. So I want to know what is causing the problem, what's getting in the way. Because if you look at any successful business, you realize they eliminated everything that wasn't essential. Like business growth is a process of subtraction. It's removing, eliminating, cleaning up, firing, hiring, right? Getting the right people. So my job is to figure out what is getting in their way. What are their blind spots and what are their breakdowns? Because if we can remove that, like it's almost like a garden hose. Like you pull the garden hose out of the backyard and then you go to wash the car and drops come out. And, you're just dribbling. You're like, oh man. So you got to go find out where it's plugged, right? And then you open it up and you unwind it. You can do what you need to. But that's the same way with your mind and with your business. You need to clean everything up and get rid of things that are not going to move the needle forward. That's noise. What's the signal? Like if you want to have noise versus signal, you need to be signaling the best way possible, which means you focus your attention, you take action, you look for evidence. But the key thing is we have to ask better questions. And that's where I come in. I'm the guy with the questions. I can call myself a questionologist because I'm actually extremely good at it. I know what questions to ask in the moment that cause them to think through it, make better decisions, reason through it.
And then I guess you see their reactions and it tells you a lot. Reactions, answers, all that. It becomes a lot of good data for figuring out what the issue is for them that I guess continues to arise. But do you think like a lot of this is built up bad habits from when they were younger? It could be trauma from childhood or even just a habit that they've carried through their professional life and it's got them to that point and now they've hit a ceiling and that's become a bottleneck. Is that what you're seeing more often than not?
Well, here's the thing. You're right about that. So I believe that entrepreneurship is a trauma response. And because I believe that, then I also believe that what they're doing is a result of traumas they experienced. I'm not going to solve them. Thankfully, my wife deals with that. She's an expert in trauma and certified with the greatest trauma expert in the world. So she deals with that. But what I'm doing is on the surface. So if they're traumatized, and we all are to some extent, according to Gabor Mate, this expert that she studied with, it's either big T or small t. So you're either highly traumatized or slightly traumatized. Anybody I work with is really traumatized. They wouldn't be doing what they're doing otherwise. They wouldn't be stretching it and pushing themselves and almost killing themselves. So nobody does that just, out of the blue. There's not enough motivation, but there's something inside of them that's driving them. So to your point, yes, they're traumatized. I don't solve that. But what I help them do is take little incremental steps forward, develop new habits, establish new behaviors, and then that new identity starts evolving. And it does take time. I've noticed it takes about 6 to 8 months before a new habit is established, like really crystallized. And it's a matter of how much time and effort and energy they're putting into it. But, they are traumatized. And I'm not going to solve their biggest issue, but I'm going to help them to get what they want. And that means I do the metacognitive mapping and I have a system, it's AI, and it takes all of their data, transcripts of calls, their 12-week plan, their maps. If they're willing to, give me all their access to their emails, Slack communications, every bit of communication. I plug all that data into AI and it starts telling me what their likely patterns are. And there's great research on that. So there's something called the 5 personality patterns. So you're either one pattern or 2 patterns. And so if I determine what patterns they are, then I know this is psychology. I'm not making it up. I can find out what pattern they are. I know how they're going to respond in any given situation. So, and then we can solve for it.
On that note, I mean, it is very true that being an entrepreneur, talking to entrepreneurs alike, they do put themselves in an extreme amount of pressure, stress, constant decision making, and then some more than others will be owner operators, right? And that's even more pressure. They don't want to hand anything off to anyone else. They want to do everything themselves. Now, is there a behavior, like a specific behavior that immediately tells you what the real constraint is? Is there something that you see more often than not?
Well, one of the ones that I notice most often is perfectionism. So perfectionism isn't hard to spot. It's delays. They delay something, or they're asking, or they think they're missing something, or they want to ask the whole leadership team again. They've already asked them once, but they're checking again. It's like, okay, well, wait a second, right? There's a problem here, right? Like, why do we keep checking? But also because I'm collecting data, I can take transcripts of calls. I did this with a few clients. I can take transcripts of calls. One client, the word that was said the most out of all the words that he's using, out of hundreds of hours of calls was the word maybe. Well, maybe it's hesitation. What is hesitation? Hesitation, has a direct line to perfectionism, right? Like just trying to get things right. And he's an engineer. So engineers try to get things right. It's a perfectionist mindset and a perfectionist industry. So that's the problem. Like they're not seeing what's getting in their way. They're not seeing their blind spots because they can't see them. Nobody's reflecting them back to them. Maybe their spouse occasionally, but they just, they tell their spouse whatever, and they, they disregard their spouse because they're just like, you don't know, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's it. But for somebody like me, because I study psychology and neuroscience and so on, and I'm reflecting things back to them, and I'm building a map right in front of them. Like when I say map, this is literally, a map of their thoughts, and they can't deny it. Like it's right there.
And how long does it typically take for you to collect the data to be able to say, you know what, I know how you're going to react and I know what the bottleneck is. I know where we have to, implement certain things, change different habits, different behaviors. How long does that typically take?
Well, it varies for everyone, but it's about minimum, at least if we're just starting out, 6 to 8 weeks. Like you need enough information to start discerning what's being repeated, right? Because you need to be able to look back and connect those dots and realize, okay, this situation happened, this was the reaction. Another situation, same reaction. Another situation, same reaction, right? So then you can start seeing the patterns, and then we can water it, we can clarify it and realize, all right, this is really the situation. They don't realize they're associating themselves with being a perfectionist. And once they come to that realization, then they're like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to move forward. I want to make progress. I'm like, okay, so then what can we handle more? Being a perfectionist or being okay with good enough and moving ahead?
Yeah. I want to put myself in a situation where I'm looking to start a business. I'm looking to either start or acquire a business. I have all the knowledge when it comes to finances, systems, processes, leading teams. At least I think I do. What would you recommend to somebody in those shoes? Would you recommend them to forward and onward and when they hit that bottleneck, or is that somebody who you think should self-reflect and look into something like this before they step out and make that big decision, right? Big life decision.
Either way, you're going to end up at the same place, and they're both difficult. So you get to choose which path you want to take. If you like Alex Hormozy, then he's going to tell you, just go, just do it, work hard, burn yourself to the ground, do whatever it takes, get it done, right? Make it happen. And then there's other people like Bob Proctor, perhaps, or even Dr. John DeMartini. They're going to suggest to you, ask yourself some difficult questions, do some introspection. Ask yourself, what would I do if I had all the time in the world? What would I do just for fun and even sacrifice my sleep? Like these are the kinds of things, because I have a client recently, he's working on projects that he doesn't enjoy. And he's come to the realization he's a creator and a builder. And so now his filter is, if something isn't a heck yeah, in terms of creating and building, it's a no. But he had to learn it by going through it. He could have gone the other way. He could have processed it at the front end and said, is this something that I would do in my sleep or sacrifice sleep? Is this something I would do on a weekend when I have nothing to do? Is this play for me? Is this fun? Like it just, some introspection. Because if you don't do that, well, then you'll go through the trial and errors, just like I did, from operating a small business to project management to real estate negotiations to managing a commercial portfolio and then to my own business. Did I have to do all that meandering? No, but I didn't have somebody help me ask those effective questions.
I completely agree. There's so much more to unpack there, but in hindsight, it's really the systems aren't everything, right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs that they think it's the systems, they think it's the processes, and then they implement all those things, and then they start to wonder why things aren't going the way they'd imagined it, the way they modeled it, right? So I encourage anybody who is in that situation to reach out to Dan. Dan, I appreciate you sharing that knowledge. It's very interesting. It's the first time that I've heard about this. It's a different lens, and it's going into, more us as humans, essentially, right? And being put in those difficult situations. I believe if you're not exercising discipline than you're exercising excuses, right? You're going to get better at either one, whichever one you're practicing more. Dan, I appreciate you coming on the show. Anybody who wants to reach out to Dan, I'll put his website in the show notes. Hopefully have you back soon and dig a little bit deeper into this stuff because there's a lot to unpack. But thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on the show.